Very good morning. As I say, and a very warm welcome to the Herts Chamber of Commerce webinar, Preparing Hertfordshire for the EU Transition. It's great that there's so many people joining us. Thank you for that. I'm really pleased to have a very, very strong panel for you today to give a few presentations and indeed answer your questions, which I hope you have a great deal for them. My name is John Woodruff. I'm the Business Support Manager at Herts Chamber of Commerce. I don't think you need me to say that the transition period ends on the midnight, 31st of January, 31st December, and starts 1st of January 2021. Obviously, as you all are following the papers, no doubt, UK and the EU are very much involved in detailed negotiations. Keep hearing different stories, but fingers crossed a deal will be done before too long. But of course, major changes either way, really, the way we import and export, along with business travel. Just a few housekeeping rules before we make a start. I don't want to certainly talk for too long. We want the speakers to be doing that for you and getting your questions. Just like to go through a couple of important housekeeping notes. The session is being recorded and we'll make this recording available on the Herts Chamber website after the event. Please could you put your questions for the panel in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I'm sure you've all done this many times over the last few months, not the chat function. Please talk amongst yourselves, network, etc. But questions for the panel just in the Q&A. That's all we'll be looking at, and we'll go through those. And we'll share the speaker and panelist contact details. And Paul, are you happy for your slides to be shared as well? Yeah, so so I'm looking the wrong way, Paul. Thank you. Thanks so much indeed. Okay, so I think that's about it from me. On to our panelists. We have James Martin, who's Director of Policy at the British Chamber of Commerce. James joined the BCC in May this year, and he's led several programmes of policy and campaign work on behalf of retailers when he was with the British Retail Consortium, and then prior to that had 12 years in Whitehall, so he knows his way around government pretty well. We have Leslie Batchelor, OBE, International Trade Expert and Champion and Bootcamp Director. Just by way of background, Leslie was the Director General of the Institute of Export for 12 years, so a great deal of knowledge there. She's also been co-chair of Bribery Act 2010 and has worked with the government advising on the APPG advisory panels, trade and investment, manufacturing select committees supporting SMEs, etc., and also been involved in trade negotiations. She also runs export boot camps. We have Dr. Brian Stammers, who's the Growth Account Manager at our friends and colleagues over at the Herts Growth Hub, supporting businesses based in Hertfordshire. Brian's also their lead advisor for the EU transition, so another great expert to be asking questions of, bringing his experience as a former international trade advisor with DIT. And last but by no means least, we have Paul Samra, who is Brexit Impact Specialist at Moore Kingston Smith. Paul's been a partner with MKS since 1992, having trained and qualified with the firm, extensive knowledge of business and share valuations, and is able to offer a broad range of strategic, commercial and taxation advice. So being their Brexit Impact Specialist, Paul will now give his presentation called Brexit, the Final Countdown. Paul, over to you, please. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Hope everyone can hear me. Thumbs up. If you can. Yeah, great. Okay, so we're going to crack on as I try to move the screen on, and it's not moving, but that's good. It was before. I don't know why it's not moving. Anyway, okay. It's not a good start.
Oh, if down at the bottom, I think it might suddenly give you some more options. There should be.
Oh, right. Okay, we're off. Right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. And a quick whiz through. You'll get the full slide deck after the webinar, but I'm just going to pick out a few for you, and we'll see how we go. So as John has said, the clock is ticking, time is running out. I'm sure you've all had a number of communications from HMRC and the government, and that's just the latest one, which is quite ironic that they're putting the onus on businesses to get everything sorted when, of course, there's nothing sorted at the moment in respect to a deal. That's how Brexit will affect businesses, a number of different areas, and we'll touch on some of them as we go through the presentation. But almost every aspect of running a business, even if you don't transact with the EU 27, because maybe your suppliers or your customers do, and so there is a knock-on effect. Those businesses that will really feel the impact, those rooted in the UK, the mobile businesses, and quite heavily those interconnected, the multinationals, are going to really be affected. Now, I sort of narrowed it down to 4 distinct areas, and a number of issues fall into each area. I think the questions are, who can I employ, and can my goods cross borders? And those 2 aspects, people and customs, are by and large already addressed. We don't need a deal, we don't need no deal, we know where we are. What we don't know are the number 3 and 4, the standards that products must meet, contracts, who bears the costs of tariffs and duties, what those tariffs might be, regulations, data transfer, professional equivalence of qualification. Those sort of things are what we're waiting for if a deal comes about. And it's as simple as that, really. That's what it boils down to. Obviously, we've seen all the images of lorries queuing at Dover and what's going to happen, and we'll come on to that in a moment. So just want to quickly whiz through people and the implications for your business, because effectively any EU 27 citizen who is working for you at the moment, you need to make some checks to ensure that they can stay in the UK after 30th of June next year. If they've already banked 5 years of being in the UK, they can just go onto an app and get what's called settled status. If they haven't been here for 5 years yet, then they can apply for pre-settled status. Once their 5 years are up, they can then retain or get settled status, and family members, the same applies. So I think that the most important action point to take away from the people side of things is for you to check your workforce, make sure that if you have any EU 27 citizens, that they have the settled status or they have pre-settled status. At least they've started the process. It's quite painless, it doesn't cost anything, but come 30th of June next year, they need to have ticked those boxes. If you're looking to recruit staff, and the way unemployment is rising in the UK at the moment as a result of coronavirus, maybe there is less need to recruit from overseas, maybe. But if you were looking to recruit from overseas in the EU 27 or beyond, there is now a points-based immigration system that comes into play on the 1st of January. And you need to be a Home Office licensed sponsor, and the cost of that varies depending on the size of the business. But and there is an annual fee as well as an initial registration fee. All in, you're probably looking at about £2,500. Takes about 8 weeks to set up. Maybe longer at the moment because of the lockdowns that we've had, and various points you just need to bear in mind. There needs to be a minimum salary threshold, and the candidates must be able to speak English to a good standard. So there's various hoops for you to go through, but as I say, it may be that the emphasis on immigration for skills may have already been met by vacancies in the job market in the UK as we go into 2021. So another action point there is for you to audit your workforce, as I mentioned, and to check that they have the right to work, and diarise expiry dates for pre-settled status so that they do meet their settled status. Ensure the contracts of employment refer to having a right to work. I'm told that you can't dismiss purely on the basis of not having a work permit. There's various hoops you need to go through, I'm told by my HR colleagues, but certainly it would be good practice to have in your contracts of employment that aspect. And just consider your talent pipeline, as I say, whether or not you need to be a licensed sponsor or not. So we're into a hard border between the UK and the EU 27. What I mean by a hard border is that customs paperwork is needed. And I'm sure you've probably heard all about this. Customs declarations are needed because the EU 27 will view the UK as any other third-party country. And as a result, if you already export across to the US or Australia, New Zealand, you'll be aware of what customs paperwork needs to be completed. But clearly, if you're exporting into the EU 27, you've got significantly more paperwork to deal with, depending on the volume of your trade. And as I said, we've seen the pictures of the lorries, etc. And the headlines. I was on a call with a webinar with Mr. Gove, who was asked the question about lorries going into Kent if they were just delivering within Kent, so far as the access permit was concerned. And he couldn't really answer that, to make a distinction between a lorry that might be crossing the channel that might require a permit, and a lorry that might just be going into Canterbury, dropping off and coming out again. But I'm sure that that minor issue will have been addressed. So there is a wonderful document which is 206 pages long. I recommend, if you are exporting or importing, that you look at that. It's on the web, the UK border operating model, and it goes into quite a lot of detail. The new Goods Vehicle Movement Service, GVMS, Smart Freight Systems, is coming, just like Christmas. I suspect Christmas will get here before the new GVMS. We have a date. I think, James, we had a date of the 23rd of December, I saw, was the likely date, which gives everyone 8 days. And of course, everyone's going to be on holiday anyway, to get used to it. You couldn't make it up. Well, it is the pantomime season, so at least we're doing it in the right way. There was a survey done by Raconteur in the paper a few weeks back. It was as a result of COVID, but I thought it was quite interesting because actually I think some of it relates to Brexit. And there were sort of 55% said that businesses would be considering moving suppliers more locally. And I wonder whether that might be partly a Brexit effect as opposed to necessarily a COVID effect. But interesting that might the knock-on effect. Now, in terms of contracts, everyone should have international contracts with your customers or suppliers, and that they're called the Incoterms, the clauses that are in there. And we suggest that you review, another action point, your Incoterms to make sure that they are relevant for the post-Brexit era. In particular, the aspect of who pays the duties, who pays the taxes. Whilst we are in the one market, EU 28 at the moment, of course, there's no tariffs, there's no duties. And therefore, if you have a clause that says, you know, Joe Bloggs, the supplier, is going to pay the duty, well, there won't be any. So it's redundant. But actually, come 1st of January, that clause becomes very, very live, especially if there's no deal. I mean, even if there is talk of a deal, we may not have completely tariff-free trade. There might be certain exceptions. Watch this space. If you're importing, things to be aware of, knowing your commodity code, another action point, make sure, and you as a customer or supplier should make sure you get it right. Because if you don't get it right, it will land on you as the customer receiving the goods, that your exporter from wherever has got it wrong. It will be you that suffers because you won't get your goods on time, and there'll be extra costs and there'll be a load of hassle. So understanding what commodity codes have been used on stuff coming into the country and also stuff leaving the country is very important. I've mentioned Incoterms. Everyone should have an EORI number now. It was automatically supplied by HMRC towards the end of last year, and that should be on your documentation. And indeed, when you're exporting, it should be on the customs declarations. This phrase, the importer of record, is quite important because that person, whoever is the importer of record, will be responsible for making sure that all taxes and duties are paid. And whoever you get to act, maybe it might be the owner of the goods at time of import, it might be the broker or the agent, but it's very, very important that you clarify who is going to become the importer of record. And the Amazons of this world are refusing to take that on, quite understandably, I guess. And so just be aware of that when you are exporting as to who is going to be the importer of record. There is 6 months stage introduction to full customs control, so there is a relative short period of relaxation, but that in terms of controlled goods such as weapons or excise like alcohol, there will not be a 6-month delay on that. So that will kick in on the 1st of January. And then, of course, the other issue is that you might end up running 2 systems alongside each other, one for exports to the EU 27 and one for the rest of the world. Not particularly efficient, but be aware of that. We know they're complicated. We know they require specialist knowledge. Plug for Chambers of Commerce, because the Chambers of Commerce have set up the Chamber Customs, and have really bolstered that up. And I think they still have capacity to take on new business, and I would certainly recommend them to help and do the paperwork for you. Obviously, there's going to be a charge, but you're in good hands. Because it does take an awful lot of effort. If you want to do it yourself, the good news is there are grants available, as shown on the screen. It's a first come, first served pot, and it closes next June. But if you are looking to recruit or retrain staff to do customs declarations, there is some money available. Service firms, that's a grid there that you'll get in your notes as to what the changes might happen. This is might, we don't yet know. I've said that qualifications are up for grabs. We don't know about data transfer. So by and large, VAT, it remains unchanged at the moment, unless you're dealing with the MOS scheme, the one-stop shop. And that you would have to register almost certainly in each EU country where services are digitally provided. So just moving on, data, as I touched on earlier, data, the UK has said we don't have a problem with data being transferred from the UK to the EU 27. So that's fine. But the EU 27 have an issue with personal data coming across into the UK. Maybe a deal will address this. We hope it will. But in the short term, certainly look at the standard contractual clauses that are available on the ICO website, the Information Commissioner's website there, ico.org.uk. To try and cover off that point. So far as GDPR is concerned, there's no relaxation to GDPR. GDPR is the one thing that is remaining unchanged and is required both UK-wise and EU 27-wise. Contracts and GDPR I've mentioned about the Incoterms and GDPR being unaffected. I think .eu websites, I think if you do have a .eu website, you will have had some communications warning you that they will be terminated, and you might need to change your domain name. Travel in a post-Brexit world, well, you need more than 6 months on your passport. You need to get travel insurance because there'll be no more reciprocity across that. And from late 2022, there will be a visa required to travel. More paperwork, more cost, more hassle. And a reminder that EU ID cards, so if you have anyone who's working for you that is an EU 27 citizen, if they do travel abroad and then come back from October next year, they will have to come back in on a passport, not on their EU ID card. So getting ahead, just that's my sort of checklist as I intimated there. Map and audit your supply chains if you haven't done already. Communicate with your customers, communicate with your suppliers, and make sure within the contracts you've got very clear understanding of who will bear the costs of any delays. That is very important. Any delays higher up the food chain that have a knock-on effect on you, you want to be protected, or at least have the situation addressed. With less than 30 days to go, stockpiling might be too late to do. I've said about the commodity codes and tariffs, inverted commas, because we don't yet know for certain, but there is the UK GT, UK General Tariffs list that is available. It's on the HMRC website. You can get a tariff clearance approval. I don't know whether that would come through before the end of the year, probably not, but you would get a I think if you search binding tariff information, you'll get a link to getting approval for what your code is for your product. Certificate of origin, that's quite important, because a percentage, majority percentage of the goods must be identified as to where it's come from, and that needs to be documented on the paperwork. You can apply to use customs freight simplified procedures, but again, something for the chambers to help and assist on as to what they do. You should have your EORI number. Applying for AEO status is a kite mark. Too late for that now. A lot of work goes into that. But once the dust has settled, it's something that you might want to consider. But it certainly isn't just a day's exercise. It's quite a comprehensive work program you've got to go through to get you this wonderful kite mark. There we go. The other points are fairly straightforward. IP, check the trademarks, whether they're still going to be protected in the EU 27. You might need to register new ones in the EU. Existing ones will be protected, but going forward, you will need to trademark accordingly. Cash flow and budgets are absolutely vital these days, and make sure those are up to date. If you have a subsidiary company or a holding company over in the EU 27, you might want to consider making any cash payments such as dividends, interest, or royalties now before the 31st December, because there is a strong likelihood that there might be withholding taxes introduced by each country when we come out of Brexit, the transition period. So might be advisable to do that now if you were thinking about it. Customs warehouses, consider the use of that, where the goods just stay in a customs warehouse, protected from VAT and duties until they leave. Chambers of Commerce have produced a very good dashboard, which gives you the up-to-date position. It hasn't changed since September, but it is there and it is very, very useful. We run a BX360 on businesses, which covers all the checklist questions, brings it all together and gives you a kind of an action plan as to what to concentrate on. So we're happy to help on that, little bit of a plug. And that is it. That was quite a quick whiz through of what I normally do in about an hour, but I hope that was okay. Slightly over the 20 minutes, but they're my details. As I say, you'll get all the slides and everything. I hope you found that useful. I will stop sharing.
Paul, thank you very much indeed for an excellent presentation. I see that Breege Leahy, our CEO for the Chamber, has also put that in the chat room, so much appreciated. Thank you. Got a couple of questions to ask, but before we go any further, Alison, could you just put up, following Paul's presentation, could you just put up our one question or one slide of questions we've got for people? It's really just to get a feel here we go, thank you very much. How prepared do you feel your business is for the 1st of January? And this is to help panel discussion. For many more questions, give you a few seconds to answer that one, if you don't mind completing, please. And then we'll just look at the figures. The average figure, I believe, is about 60% of companies are somewhat prepared or getting there, which leaves an awful lot that still needs work to be done. Is the answer coming up, Alison, or the answers? Oh, lovely, thank you. Okay, so yeah, so that's about right. So very prepared and prepared, 55%, slightly under average maybe, needs some guidance, almost a third, over a third already, not prepared, 10%, unsure, 5%. Well, I see at the moment we've only got one question in the Q&A, so please, everyone who's answered who's not prepared or needs some guidance, then do please fire away with questions, and so we try and answer as many as we can. Thank you for that. Paul, just to cut, thank you very much again for that. That's absolutely brilliant. You mentioned the UK border operational model, which is it is a lengthy document, but don't let that put you off. It is great. And we've also put a link to that on the Herts Chamber website. You mentioned Incoterms. We've got 2020 Incoterms now, haven't we, Paul? I think, yeah, it's on your slide. It said 2010. Is that? Yeah, yeah. Sorry, no,
no, that's fine.
Just, but it is Incoterms 2020 now, I think. You mentioned customs declaration forms, Chamber Customs. James, you might say a few more bits about that in your few words. But yeah, in Herts Chamber is looking at doing those. We're undertaking training at the moment, so we are open for business, and that will be in January, all being well. Thank you very much indeed, Paul, for that. James, do you want to come in now and just say a few words, please, on behalf of the BCC?
Fantastic, thank you, John. And just to say thank you to Paul, that was an absolutely superb survey, which I don't think soft-soaped any of the issues, but gave a really good head start. If you do get a chance to listen to the hour-long version, I would still recommend it. I hear quite a few of these, and that was absolutely top rank. And also thanks to Brej, to John, to Alison, to the team. I sit in London. I rely on the insight and the expertise of colleagues, and I can tell you now that in Hertfordshire, you have an incredibly effective set of advocates for your causes. Sometimes can feel a little bit painful where I'm sat, but I can absolutely assure you that they are entirely on your side and put the case for Hertfordshire superbly. It's my pleasure to come and chat. I was saying before we started that I have several versions of this written. One is that there's a deal announced yesterday, one is there's a deal announced this morning, one is there's a deal announced that I'm speaking, and I'm afraid the one I'm about to deliver is we still haven't heard a deal. At the BCC, we've been tracking business preparedness for Brexit quite carefully through the coronavirus pandemic. And actually, we've seen a pretty difficult position. It's been deteriorating. Most companies think they are less well prepared now than they were in 2017. And that is challenging. I think part of that is that the impact of coronavirus, the need to furlough people, has just brought horizons a little bit closer. There are plenty of companies, plenty of you who a month ago will have been quite happy, I think, to survive to early December. Getting to January feels like a bonus. And I think there is something in that. We kind of think about it as a hierarchy of needs. You know, when you are thinking about, can you open up your company tomorrow, what does COVID security require, etc., etc. It's quite difficult to think about what are the export markets, but I would urge all of you to do that. And I think that the survey that Paul has just given is a really good starting point. The other thing we found, which is notable, is small and medium companies tend to be a little bit less well prepared than bigger competitors. And it seems to be that the size of the cash flow available is winning out over small companies can be a little bit more nimble. So I would just put that there. That is definitely worth thinking about, but hopefully you can move a little bit quicker. So we've seen that picture deteriorate a little bit, and it's entirely natural. I think the other thing that I would say is, and we say really strongly a lot, including to Mr. Gove and to his officials, is that there is just a significant lack of actionable information out there. There are a lot of things that companies can do, from your I numbers to looking at your supply chain to thinking about your data flows, which can feel a little bit strange. You know, these companies are set up to build widgets and sell widgets. You're used to marketing them to France as if you were selling them to Bedfordshire. That's going to change, but your data flows are another big thing. There are all these areas out there that you need to start thinking about now. But there are some big areas. What are the major gaps? And Paul very kindly gave a bit of a plug for our preparedness checklist, our unanswered questions document. You may see a slight evolution of that in the Sunday Times on Sunday. I couldn't possibly comment. And it may go a little bit broader on Monday. Let's hope the recording of this doesn't go out until Monday, and that in fact we do issue that. But there are some areas that we just don't know. So what does the Northern Ireland border look like? The border operating model is a good document. It's 200 pages. You don't need to read it all, but there's some very useful hints and tips in there. But it explicitly excludes the border between Northern Ireland and GB. So if you are in the business of importing milk from dairy, which you turn into cheese, then you don't really know what that's going to look like. You don't know what the times are. You don't really know what the requirements are. Similarly, if you are in the business of selling cheddar to France, then you don't really know what the food labeling regime is going to look like. These are big, hefty issues that sit outside the deal. So I think we are absolutely clear that there needs to be more actionable information, and we continue to press for it. And there are some areas that we anticipate getting a bit more over the next week. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a bit of a glut over the next 10 days, deal or no, so watch out for that, but it will all come. I think it's actionable. But the big question is, will there be a deal, and what will it look like, and what's that process like? I'm not a gambling person. It's one of the few vices I haven't picked up, even in my 20s, despite serious attempts to pick up most of the others. I do think there'll be a deal. I think the commercial logic will out, but that is by no means guaranteed. And there are still three big areas. One is fishing, which represents a relatively tiny part of the UK economy, but is politically totemic in a lot of places. I don't think that's the case in Hertfordshire, but I could be wrong. But in Aberdeenshire, in the southwest, it's incredibly important. But I think that gives a sense of where the politics and the overall economics might lie. The second area is around the governance of the deal, if there is a deal. So fundamentally, whose courts determine a breach? How does that work? If the UK decides to go towards a kind of Singaporean model where it feels a bit less regulated, how much can the EU pull us back? And then thirdly, there is a whole range of stuff around, it's called level playing field, but it's what kind of subsidy regime can the UK put in place? If it decides it wants to spend money on British tech firms, can it do that in a way that allows them to outcompete French or German companies? And you can see why the EU has got there. My feeling is we'll end up with a deal. What will that deal look like? I mean, one, it's going to be big. I think it will be at least 1,800 pages long, probably bigger. We'll come to that in a second. But in terms of the substance, I think it will be slightly thicker than we may have thought. I don't think it's going to be by any means a thick deal, and I think it will still be quite different to the arrangements we currently have for trading with the EU and for large chunks of the world where we rely on deals the EU negotiated over the last 40 years. I suspect, and there are no promises here, it will have a little bit more around services than we might have thought, maybe something around mutual recognition of qualifications, but this is just reading between the lines. I think it will have a bit more around some of the shared EU programs like Erasmus and Horizon, and I think it will have a little bit more on security cooperation, but this is supposition based on reading the press and various other well-placed sources as much as anything, so I wouldn't rely on it too much. So it's not going to be down the absolute thinnest of the thin, and we've been absolutely clear that a deal is better than no deal, but it's not going to give you the same level of market access that you would have had you will have on the 30th of December. I think that is absolutely clear. And nor have we headed for that part. What will the Prime Minister's decision on whether he thinks the deal is acceptable be? I think there will be a series of questions in his mind around economics, but equally it's absolutely clear that it needs to fit with his idea of UK sovereignty. And those two things can feel like they are pulling in slightly different directions. So our ability to set our rules, as the Prime Minister sees it, might mean actually we get less access to EU markets or more difficult access. The deal itself, there's going to be a couple of stages if it comes. So the first stage will be a broad political announcement, which won't give a lot of the detail. And I think it's fair to say you will see quite a lot of spin, quite a lot of political comment from both sides. And I would say hold your fire at that stage, keep your powder dry. It's not going to be absolutely clear. And I would think about it, the baseline should be what the status quo is, not what would have happened had we fallen out without a deal. That isn't how businesses are going to have to change. Think about it in terms of right now, I can transport stuff just in time in this way. What is the process going to be to try and deliver that? And what are the administrative blocks to get there? I think that's absolutely critical. And we saw some of this in terms of discussions around the recent Japanese deal, where there was a discussion of soy sauce and whether it's better than WTO or better that we get under the EU deal. And that's a really important thing. And then a couple of days later, I suspect we'll see the technical deal, probably 2,000 pages. We're going to be trying to go through it and give a neutral summary. There are a lot of other good organisations out there as well. And the government will try and give, hopefully, actionable, neutral information. But at that point, you're getting really close to December the 31st. And there are plenty of businesses who will go on Christmas holiday, will be knackered from trying to survive. I use that as a technical business term. I don't teach it on MBAs, but I think it makes sense. And you may well follow a lot of your non-essential staff who are probably the ones who would be thinking about this. So there's support out there, but it might be quite difficult. Avoid the spin, think about the realities of the situation, apply it. Paul very kindly and John very kindly mentioned the Chamber Customs process. That's our attempt as a network, and Hertfordshire are at the forefront of this to try and deliver a pretty sensible, cost-effective system that does a lot of that process for you. I think there's still plenty of capacity with the system, so reach out now to John and colleagues and think about how that can be of help. So look out for the government guidance, look out for the BCC analysis, apply it to your specific circumstances. And I'm sure Brian and Leslie will, and their teams will be providing huge amounts of support as well. You know, as a business community, we're all in this together, but it will be difficult. One of the things that we're asking for, we're calling it a series of easements. So are there things that the UK can do when there is a deal and the EU can do as well on its side to try and smooth the process a little bit? I don't think it's going to be pushed back. I think it's going to happen in early January. There doesn't seem to be much space in my mind for the government saying, well, actually, we won't switch this on until July, but it's possible. But actually, as the Belgian authorities have done, can you at least not fine people when they turn up with the wrong paperwork for a grace period? Can you do something similar around data? But at an administrative level, I think there probably will be some delays. The border doesn't look, or plenty of well-placed observers have said the borders don't look great. There are issues around the ports in terms of their preparedness. And we saw the tailbacks that came in Kent from the French testing a system that added a few seconds to each thing. You know, these are big, complicated systems, and there will be an ironing out process. And then there will be a secondary peak of concern midway through the year when some of these easements fall away. So finally, the future, if we have a deal or if we don't, I think there will be a process of building up whatever we've got, maybe over 10 or 15 years, and trying to come to something that's slightly closer to the current business relationship, but without the political sharing. So I do think it's going to be a fairly bumpy ride. I do think there will be a deal, and I think that will be a good thing, but I don't think it will be a deal that gives us the same level of business access, imports, exports, etc., as we might have thought. But it's really difficult to see how it lands. I was on one of these, this will be my final point because I'm sure I've spoken over it because it is fascinating, but I was on one of these with a partner from one of the big services firms, and she said, don't try and be excellent. Excellence left the building. Excellent needed 5 years worth of preparation time. Just try and be slightly better than your competitors. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Try and be good. And with the support of the Hertfordshire Chamber business team and others, you've got a much better chance than many of your competitors for getting there. But it is going to be quite a tough ride. So I'll leave that there, and I will throw over to you, John, for questions, etc.
Lovely, thank you very much. Sorry, my mute button wouldn't change. And thank you very much indeed, James. That's wonderful. Good to get a balanced view from inside, if you like, really. We've got a few questions, which is great. So we'll go to those next. I know that Brian from the Growth Hub wants to say a few words, and we're bringing Leslie as well to also say a few words. But let's start with some of the questions, which, as I said at the start, we'll throw open to the panel, and please jump in, whoever's best placed. This is a bit of a potential broad brush one, and maybe a bit difficult to answer. But question: how long do you think it will take for the UK economy to adapt to new or any new trading rules, which will hopefully be agreed? Maybe that's how long's a piece of string, but anybody like to have a stab at that one?
Well, I can just say, the actual trading rules, what they're really talking about is what we've already been doing forever. So you've got to bear in mind that we used to, the first mention of a customs duty was in the Magna Carta. Letters of credit, bills of lading, this sort of stuff been going on for donkey's years. The biggest thing that really happened in shipping was containerization. So the process isn't really changing. What's changing and what's going to become important is the tariffs and the amount that's agreed within the free trade agreement, if we manage to get a free trade agreement. And then from then onwards, that's about businesses understanding how rules of origin work and the terms of the rules of origin that have been agreed within that. So we're going to have to change the way we look at international trade, and we're going to have to stop thinking about it as being, some good old reliable person in the corner who we never paid enough money to, but actually they got on with the work. Obviously, they're going to be leaning very heavily on the chambers and the growth hubs to actually get on with this, but this is real, the nitty gritty of how we actually operate now. And that's, that could be, well, it's going to have to be fast, otherwise we're going to lose our markets abroad.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that one. And what is the latest advice for businesses exporting to the EU regarding VAT and its deferral? Apparently the rules here are going to change. Is anybody a VAT expert on that one? I don't know. Paul, do you want to leap in with that?
Yeah, not quite sure I understand the question, but in terms of VAT, so far as services are concerned, was one of the questions that I tried answering before my whole machine crashed, was basically that nothing really is changing. And the UK will be treated as a third party, much like any other country. So in terms of services, unless you're doing digital services under the MOS scheme, then by and large the VAT implications are neutral, and there's no changes.
Fantastic, thank you. Another one from the company: we support a lot of service-based companies. How do all these rules work for companies without a physical product, e.g. marketing agencies, recruitment firms, learning and development companies?
Well, that picks up the last point. The one thing I would say is if you're transferring any exhibition stands or promotional equipment across the border and bringing it back, you would need a carnet which just confirms that actually the goods are not for export, they're just for the purposes of your trade, and you can bring them back.
I think the other point about the carnets are quite important to note, that you actually have to lodge a bond or a guarantee against that, and sometimes it gets very complicated and you need to get a plan in place if that's the type of process you want to use. It depends on how expensive your goods are, to be quite honest, as to whether you get involved with that. And as far as VAT is concerned, it's going to become more important, as a lot of the EU countries have asked everyone to use Incoterms 2020 and asked for it to be delivered duty paid. And that means that you have to have something, a representation in that country. So be very careful when you start agreeing to some of these new Incoterms that you may not, as you mentioned, Paul, in your presentation, people haven't really worried about a great deal, but they're now going to become important because actually each stage of that Incoterm means a cost to somebody, and it's allocated, and we've got to understand where that comes from. But I'm sure, Brian, you could probably answer more on that.
Brian, did you want to come in on that one?
I'm in the process of unmuting myself. I've now unmuted myself.
Yeah.
I don't think I can add anything further to what Leslie's already said, actually, because, you know, whatever happens, we are in for change, and the problem we've got is we don't know the direction or the dimension of that change, and that's really where we're in this kind of no man's land with regards to things like VAT and Incoterms and tariffs. So really, just to add those few comments, I think just sort of perhaps sort of rounds off what Leslie and Paul have just said already.
I might, John, if it's okay, I think that's absolutely spot on. I'm just going to flag two other areas actually it's worth thinking about for service-based companies. So one would be, and a point that has been made around data. So without an adequacy decision, which fundamentally I don't think is going to happen, there are serious risks and issues if you are looking to share personal data with the EU 27. And there were some cases quite recently, I think brought by German privacy campaigners, that have made that a little bit tougher. There are now something called the standard terms and conditions, which can be inserted into these contracts, which essentially give you the contractual framework that allow that data sharing to happen. My understanding is that this is not being seen as a commercial thing, so it's not being renegotiated so much as companies are quite happy just to insert them, but you do have to insert them and you do have to agree to that insertion. So that's something to be thinking about now. And the other one is intellectual property rights. If you're making adverts or what have you, and you have intellectual property rights that are potentially incredibly valuable, there's not a huge amount of clarity quite yet about how you might enforce that in other bits of the, other bits of the EU. God, sorry, we left in January, in bits of the EU. And so one of the things we're pushing for is much more certainty around how the court frameworks integrate. And actually, in the UK, we have an incredibly effective court system. You can really rely on the objectivity and the precedent value of it. Now, the EU court systems are truly objective, but they don't apply precedent in quite the same way. So I think it's arguably slightly less reliable. So those are just two of the bits to pick out, I'd say. But I wouldn't want to push that too far, and I'm certainly not criticising any other court systems.
I want to make an observation about distribution agreements. Many companies, manufacturing companies in this country, use distributors worldwide, and under the Treaty of Rome, of course, it was said some time ago that technically you could not have exclusive distribution rights. One of the things that seems to have been swept aside a little bit in this is that many of these companies are probably going to have to renegotiate their distribution agreements with whoever their distributors are in the various countries within the EU. Just a comment.
Thank you. We've got a few more questions to go, currently another 6, and say time is clocking on, but we'll try and get through them all. This is quite a specific, I was talking to Brian about this earlier. It's a gentleman who manufactures calendars. How can he find out if there'd be any tariffs on calendars in the event of no deal? He can't find anything on the government transition website. Brian, do you just want to briefly?
I wish I could answer that question in any detail, because until we know what the terms of the agreement are and what the associated tariff terms are going to be, it's very, very difficult to give any guidance. We're in the sort of area of generalities rather than specifics. And I think, we're not going to be able to answer those sorts of questions until we know exactly what sort of deal has been done. Leslie might have a view on that, I suspect.
Just going to make a suggestion, which is, we do know what WTO tariff agreement is in place. We know what happens there. You can look that up and find out what they call the most favoured nation tariff is that exists for the whole of the country. You can look to see what we've agreed as far as our global trade tariff is concerned on the HMRC website, and you can get at least a feel for whether or not yours is one of the target sectors. And honestly, printed goods, sometimes if people are agitated about paper and woods and all the rest of it, it might be, if it's a printed calendar, be in trouble because it might be under some sort of green agreement. But, you know, you can get a very good guideline. The ones that are going to be the real problems are going to be agriculture, pharmaceuticals, perhaps defence products, things like that. These are always the sticking points on these things and the ones that tend to have the main things coming through. So, you know, look to see what the worst case scenario is, which is the WTO one, and then compare it with what we've got as far as our global tariffs are concerned for the UK. Those are all on HMRC's website, and then you'll get a feel for exactly how much you're doing. If you're bringing it into the country already, you'll have an idea as to how much you're paying as far as duties are concerned, bringing it in, because it's really the biggest problem we've got is we import so very much, and this is where people really have been very uncertain about what's going on.
And you mentioned pharmaceuticals. There's, of course, Herts is very, very big in pharmaceuticals in many ways. Okay, thank you for that. Next question. What, if any, action do businesses selling intellectual property, such as a design consultancy, need to undertake before December 31st when no physical product is traded?
I think if your trademarks exist at the moment, that's fine. If you're looking at registering in the near future, you're going to have to be registering a UK wide first and then going across to Europe. So they're going to be split off, so they'll be treated as two separate, so probably two separate costs, etc. I think it's very much a question of a transition period, but certainly do take some serious legal advice if you're dealing in those sort of terms. But the whole idea is that we're splitting away from the European-wide trademark system and IP rights. So there's quite a lot on the IPO website, the Intellectual Property Office website as well, that would help you too. They've got a helpline too.
Okay, thank you. What are the key areas that UK-based SMEs should be considering? Today I've heard about GDPR and data, which I've just heard again, business travel and checking that EU27 employees have pre-settled status. Anything else in a nutshell?
I actually think the transition website for HMRC is very good. I think if you've got any real concerns about things, go on there, log what your company does and answer the questions. The questions are intuitive and they take you to a result. It's a very, very good starting point if you're looking to understand what you're doing. Other than that, you know, try and talk to some of your customers and find out what their concerns are. I think we keep forgetting to talk to our customers because actually they are absolutely key to getting this right. As long as they're happy, you can carry on trading.
Yeah, I've been saying that to companies asking me. I'm also saying speak to your EU companies as well. The gentleman who asked the question on VAT a couple of minutes ago, he said for VAT on goods, VAT cannot be deferred. So I don't know if anybody wants to take that one up at all. Or,
I don't understand that, sorry.
Trevor,
if he's talking about VAT on goods that can't be, the deferment scheme isn't appropriate for, then the VAT and duty would have to be paid at the time the goods arrive in the country, provided they're not going into a customs warehouse, and then the VAT is recovered in the usual way further down the line. It's a cash flow implication, but the net effect is zero on the VAT, not on the duty.
Brilliant, thank you. Trevor, I don't know if you're listening in at all still, but if you want to drop another line, then please do on that. Right, so I've got to really speed on here.
There's just one other important thing to say, John, sorry, is when they're talking about basic information, HMRC, when this basic information they're asking for is almost the same amount of information as you would fill in. So it's a little bit of a misleading statement, that, but, you know, just be prepared to give quite a lot of information across.
Smashing, thank you. We provide translation services to some businesses in Europe. At present, we use the reverse charge rules. Any idea how that might change? And then she says, I'm talking about VAT.
Can I do something really cheeky? You know, VAT, there's actually a brilliant company that's linked with one of the chambers down in Brighton called Simply VAT. And I promise you, it's got everything you possibly know about that. I'm sure Paul will be able to help as well. But, you know, it's Simply VAT. That's all they do is talk about VAT.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Trevor's come back. It was the other VAT question. Thanks for the clarification, Paul. Appreciated. So great. I've got two more questions. Just we'll squeeze them in, and still want to hear from a couple of other you two, Brian and Leslie. Is there anything positive to come out of this transition and leaving the EU in relation to selling goods into the EU?
Wow. I suppose I'm going to paraphrase Juan Light. It's too early to tell. We've left, but we're still operating under exactly the same conditions. It would economically. This depends on the balance between continuing access with the continent 30 miles away of 500 million rich people, with what changes we can do when we let's say throw off their rules to make our economy more competitive. There's going to be a 5 or 10 year transition period if there are things that can be done that are currently stopped from being done that make the UK economy more competitive. So if we can look at a nimbler approach to safety standards, if we can look at marketing, if we can look at government investment programs that are currently ruled out, then perhaps. But I would focus on getting through the next year or so, rather than necessarily assuming that things are going to get suddenly magnificently better. I'm hoping Leslie's not going to disagree with me here.
No, not at all. I'm not going to say anything except I was talking to somebody about this the other week, and of course, you know, one of the governments recently was very keen on Adam Smith as an economist, who was quite around about the 18th century. But actually one of the more modern theories apparently is something called a gravity model. And a gravity model on economics, on international trade, is very, very interesting, because the trade increases proportionately to the proximity of the market that you're dealing with. And I'm going to leave you all to look up gravity model, because I think that's possibly what we're railing against at the moment.
Thank you, Leslie. There was a sixth question, but that's disappeared off my screen, and the previous one I just asked is there. I don't know, George, if you can flit it back on at all, but if not, afraid we've lost that one for now. In our closing minutes, literally, Brian first. I know you've got some important things to say about the Growth Hub, so over to you.
Very, very quickly, the Hertfordshire Growth Hub, which of course is funded through the Local Enterprise Partnership, has a number of advisors that deal with companies on a general day-to-day basis. In fact, we've got half a dozen of them. What we're putting together at the instigation of Bays is a task force, if you want to call it that, of 3-4 people to proactively engage with companies to establish what their knowledge is of the EU transition requirements, how far they've gotten down the road of dealing with them, what further action they require to take, and most importantly, what assistance can we provide them. Now, we work very closely with the Chamber, as you well know, and in fact, in terms of the delivery of this process, what we plan to do is 2 levels of engagement. One is what I call a light touch engagement. In other words, let's just talk to the clients, customers, companies, find out exactly where they're at, find out what their comfort zone is in terms of EU transition. And it's basically just to establish where we're at. The second is a more in-depth program, which basically derives from the first, in that if companies are struggling and if they need additional support, we can either provide that through our own resources, i.e. our own advisor network, or if necessary, and probably in some cases it will be necessary, refer to the Department of International Trade group, which runs in parallel with us through the Exemplas organization, which is based in Hatfield. So we have a program designed to support the 8 principles that we talked about earlier on, or Paul talked about earlier on, in terms of the various areas of business that need to be supported, because it's not just export and import. I will leave it there because of the time situation.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Brian. Sorry, that question I've just got back up now. If we import from outside the EU and can evidence the product is to be exported to the EU, do we pay double duties on these products?
Well, you won't pay duties on it. You pay the duty to import it, and then your customer in the other country, unless they're doing it as a third, if that's another office they're sending to, it's your customer that would be paying the duty in the EU.
Smashing. Thank you. Leslie, do you just want to say a few words? And I'll do a quick
I've got two things that I'm doing at the moment, and one of them is called Export Boot Camps, and it's exactly what it says. You know, it's a boot camp to help everybody to learn all the details about exporting. It's about giving it some context and finding a strategy for finding new markets, getting out into 2021. And then on Thursday, on the 10th of December, we're launching something called Open Borders .direct. That's openborders.direct, and that is a website that's about de-risking international trade. And we've worked with Make UK, ICC, Federation of Small Business, Food and Drink Federation, British Freight Forwarders, all of these organisations together to pull together this entire website. So do have a look at it. If you go on it now, you can register interest, and we might give you a free subscription. But it's going to be that sort of gap filler for all these questions, because at the moment we just don't have one central point to go to. So.
True. Thank you so much. I think that's a very valid point as we sum up. I mean, thank you, all of you, for all your great questions from the participants and fantastic answers from the panelists, and for your time as well. But you're right, there's gov.uk, which I think is a really good site, the HMRC site, the BCC site, etc. But there's a lot of information out there, and you do have to hunt around for it. If I may just do a couple of quick plugs for various events. There's a BCC event on customs with HMRC, who we did invite to this, but said they couldn't field anybody, sadly. That's on the 15th of December. Details of that on the Hearts website. In January, 12th of January, we've got a Trading with India event, another in our series of looking at trading with countries overseas outside the EU. That's with the UK British India Council. And then the 14th of January, our export team at Hearts Chamber are doing a run through on the updates of all the documents, because they're all changing, and how to complete documentation as well. Any final last second thoughts from anybody on the panel before we say goodbye, or anything at all, or nothing? No.
I would just say ask around, ask and research. Don't bury your head in the sand. Everyone is going through it. You're not alone. As you said, there's a lot of information out there, but do talk to each other, talk to your customers, and talk to your suppliers. It's not too late, but get on with it.
Good point. Brian, sorry, I thought you were heading for your unmute
No.
button.
I really have nothing further to say other than what an extremely good experience this has been, and my congratulations to the Chamber for putting it on. I think it's been an extremely good event, and hopefully those participants, I think there were at one time 66 of them, will have learnt some information from it that they perhaps didn't know before.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your kind words, but thanks to you four that have made this possible. Your expertise far exceeds mine, I can assure you. I think on that note, say time is over now. I just wish everyone a very safe, and I don't think it's too early to say Merry Christmas. We're getting Christmas cards already, and a very happy transition period from the 1st of January. Thank you all. And we are here in Hertfordshire, the Chamber, Growth Hub, Leslie, Paul as well, and BCC support us an awful lot. So do get in touch with us if you need any help. Thank you all. Thanks.